For this week's Team ISO, we got a team that no one really expected to be at the bottom three of the Western Conference. That is the Vancouver Canucks. On the panel to discuss this are Harman Dayal. He's a Canucks reporter for The Athletic. You can find him on Twitter at Harman Dayal 2. Welcome to the show, Harman.
Thank you for having me.
And back on the show, old guest is Jeff Paterson. He hosts the Rink Wide and is a Canucks reporter for Sekeres and Price. You can find him on Twitter at Paterson Jeff. Welcome back, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's a tough situation, of course. We know in Vancouver right now, we've all heard the stories going on. In our preview episode 1 for this season 7, we went and the overall consensus was the Canucks are going to place about 4th. I don't think anybody had them lower than 5th. Yet, here we are. Let's dive right into the hard stuff. And Jeff, if you look at it, management is the first one that's pushing. I know the fans aren't happy at it as well. Who is the possible first person that could be, or other people who could be fired?
Yeah, I mean, that question's been asked an awful lot out here on the West Coast lately. And you're right. I think a lot of people thought that this team would be better than last year. That's not saying much because they were dead last in a 7-team All-Canadian division, but they went all in, they made trades, and they were supposed to be better than they have been. And it has been a tire fire here on so many levels. And now the blame game has begun. And, you know, the coach is always the easiest one to let go and to move on from. And I certainly don't think that the job security of Travis Green is particularly good right now, even though he got a 2-year contract extension in the offseason. But you look at the issues that plague this team. They can't score. They have been historically bad when it comes to penalty kill. There have been questions about the systems that they are playing. Their best players, not their best players. They're not getting anything out of a lot of their best players. And some wonder if the coach has lost the room. So it feels like a lot of the heat is on the coach, but that doesn't excuse the general manager, the guy that built this team, assembled this team, has traded first-round picks in the last couple of years, and has gone all in and is on the record as saying he believed that this was a playoff team. And as they approach the 20-game mark, they could barely see the playoffs with binoculars as it stands right now. So there is a ton of work to be done. I think there's enough blame to go around. The players have underperformed. The coaches certainly haven't brought the best out in the players. And the general manager, as it appears now, put together a flawed roster that's sort of coming back to bite him and this hockey club right now.
Oh my goodness, Harman. How long is the leash, though? Like, we didn't expect them to be in this position, but if they continue to lose, and we usually have that implemented Thanksgiving deadline, right? Where it's like, that's the deadline, that's when it is, and they're struggling still. Like, how long can it go? Another couple of weeks, another month before the axe gets dropped and somebody gets chopped?
Yeah, and that's $1 million question, right? And I think part of the thing that the organization is going through right now is I don't think that they expected this coming out of the gate. Jim Benning spoke last Thursday and said that he could have never foreseen this kind of a start, and I think ownership is right there with them in terms of them being a little bit blindsided by the way things have gotten off the rails so quickly. And we've heard other reporters talk about the fact that it wasn't necessarily a plan B, C, D for if this season goes off to the start that it has so far, of what the possible options are going to be. So I think even from an ownership perspective, just the vibe that I get is they're a little bit perplexed right now, and they're trying to sort of discern what exactly is the root issue for this team. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I think they're kind of, in a certain sense, biding time and figuring out, okay, who is the prime culprit? What can we do to get this back on track? Can we even salvage this season? Because if you look at it right now, and a lot of fans can look at the Canucks relative to a playoff spot and say, oh, well, they're only 5 points back. Even with the start that they've had, there's 63 games left to go. That sounds on the surface like a lot of runway, but the thing you've got to keep in mind is, including Nashville, there's, I think, 6 teams that the Canucks would have to leapfrog in the Western Conference just to get that second wildcard spot. Historically, it's taken 93 points to claim that last wildcard spot on average over the last 5 full NHL seasons. To hit 93 points, the Canucks would have to play at a 103-point pace over the balance of the rest of the season. For context, only 5 teams in the last full 82-game season were able to play at a 103-point pace or better. So the Canucks are already at a point where they need to be one of the hottest teams in the NHL just to have a chance at sniffing the last wildcard spot. It's early, but it's already really, really bleak when it comes to the playoff picture. And it's hard to say. We're going to have to kind of see. And I think some of it is also going to be dictated by how long before apathy kind of starts to kick in for this fan base. Because one thing that I found a little bit interesting after the loss last night against Chicago was people were obviously upset, but I don't think there was the same level of outrage there was maybe a week or two ago. That to me is a sign that people slowly, gradually are starting to tune out a little bit. I can't even begin to tell you how many comments I've seen from people saying, I've stopped watching the games, or I couldn't finish watching this one, or I'm done going to a game until there's some sort of change. Obviously, we'll see if that reflects at some point from an ownership level in terms of the amount of tickets that get sold. And, this homestand, I think a lot of people were on edge waiting to see if there would be vocal dissatisfaction. And there were chants and segments here or there, but I don't think there was anything overarching in terms of something that ownership couldn't ignore. So I think those are factors that are going to matter as well over the next handful of weeks, because at a certain point, we all know this is a tire fire, but whether this starts to affect the casual fans' interest in this franchise is going to matter, especially from a brand management perspective. So, I mean, I honestly can't tell you when a change is going to happen, but the way this is trending, something has to give here.
You're talking about the casual fans. They're not coming to games. You want to see games. You want to see good games. You want to see the team win, but you want to see, like me as a fan, I would still go to maybe bad Leaf games, but you get the excitement, you get the thrill. And when you said, again, pinpointing, what it is, that immediately makes me think, Matthews and Marner struggling, and, in Toronto in the same market, that's Elias Pettersson. He's the highlight reel machine as well. He looks like he is struggling. And I think if you pinpoint it, he could be one of those factors. If Marner doesn't do well and he's not getting the puck to Matthews, if Pettersson's not doing too well, he's not getting the puck to maybe Bezer or someone to score. So it possibly could be a bit of on him and its confidence of maybe him, having low self-esteem, trying to do too much on the ice. What can you do to maybe fix that confidence in Pettersson's game, Jeff?
Yeah, and everybody's been waiting all season long. Of course, he missed training camp and most of the preseason with his contract squabble along with Quinn Hughes. Quinn Hughes hasn't really shown any signs that layoff affected him. I think it's important to remember with Elias Pettersson, he missed the final 30 games last year with a bit of a mystery wrist injury. We know the nature of the injury. We don't fully know the extent and how it impacted him in his offseason training. He has said repeatedly that it didn't, that everything's fine, but to watch him on the ice, he doesn't look anything like the player that burst onto the scene in the National Hockey League, won Rookie of the Year, and then backed that up with another really solid season where everything just flowed instinctually. Like, he made it look easy, didn't overthink the game. And I do think that some of that has happened this season. With a contract of $7+ million comes expectations, and maybe he's wearing a little bit of that. But I mean, this was a guy that did things early in his career that we just hadn't seen in decades from a player. I mean, almost go back to Pavel Bure, and it's not fair to, I'm not making the comparison, but just in terms of the excitement level that fans latched onto. And Elias Pettersson showed that early on. The guy scored 10 goals in his first 10 games in the NHL. Like, who does that? Not many guys. And the player we're watching now is a far cry from that player. And it just feels like this city wants to believe every time that he makes a play with the puck, they want to believe that he's turning a corner and that it's going to come here quickly, but he's gone quiet offensively. And it's not just him. I mean, Brock Besser has 4 goals as they near the 20-game mark, and one of those was into an empty netter. In fact, his last goal 7 games ago was an empty netter. And so there hasn't been much offense from Brock Besser, who led the team in goals and scoring last season, and Bo Horvat, the captain, and a guy that generally, you can count on to show up and turn in an honest performance. And in fact, the captain, who's not terribly outspoken, but last week accused teammates of being passengers, Bo Horvat has gone 7 games without a goal and has 1 in his last 12. Like, these are the main characters on this Vancouver team in terms of offensive drivers and offensive producers, and nobody's doing it. And that's a caustic combination. And so, Harm's talking about the homestand here recently. Look, they played 10 games at home. They scored 22 goals total. They got shut out 1-0 by Chicago in their last home game. 22 goals in 10 games. Like, it's one thing to be bad. It's another to be bad and boring. And you've got to sell that to a fan base. And when they come back off this 5-game road trip coming up here, they've got 10 of 12 at Rogers Arena, like over the holiday period in December, when lots of families and kids, and there's supposed to be excitement about going to the rink, and they got to sell that to a fan base. And it's just not happening on so many levels for this organization. So for me, until Elias Pettersson figures it out and gets things moving in the right direction, I don't know how this hockey club gets out of the funk that it is in. And to Harm's point, I think sooner rather than later, change is going to have to come, because I just don't think the status quo is going to be acceptable in this market.
Yeah, it's one last question on this topic, and that's the hardest one to say. And out of those core guys, those young, talented players that you're expecting more out of, Harman, which could be, dangling to be moved? Could one of them be moved if they're going to make a drastic change here?
Well, I think we can strike off Elias Pettersson off that list for starters. You're not going to move your franchise center. And unless you're rebuilding, you're probably not going to move your captain either in Bo Horvat. Now, maybe is that an off-season decision you make if you want to retool and head in a different direction? Okay, maybe that's a discussion you have down the line. Brock Besser, I mean, the problem with trying to make a trade right now is, number one, you've got GMs circling like sharks, ready to take advantage of you. No one's going to be looking to throw you a lifeline here. And I just don't think that this team is one trade away from fixing things, to be quite honest with you. So when I look at these core players, yes, they're underperforming, but I don't see an easy fix, especially, do you really want to be selling low on a piece like Brock Besser mid-season? It's just, and let's say you've come to the conclusion that you want to shake up the room, you want to make some kind of big move, and you look at a piece like Besser and say, okay, let's see what's out there on the market. How many teams have the kind of piece that the Canucks would actually covet in that kind of trade and would be willing to move that piece mid-season, right? The Canucks, if they are going to move a player like Besser, probably, they'd be targeting, say, a top 4 right-handed stud defenseman who's similar aged. How many of those guys are going to be available on the trade market in November? It's just, I can't see a scenario where that happens. You're going to be moving these guys for cents on the dollar. So when it comes to the idea of moving bigger pieces, and there's obviously been a lot of talk about JT Miller's future as well, especially because Miller and Horvat and their contract statuses, and the fact that they're not free agents this summer, but the summer after that, they're UFAs. Those decisions, I think, are going to be had in the offseason. Those are decisions that have to be made once you've crystallized who your key organizational leaders are going to be, where I would be surprised if Jim Benning is still the one at the helm making those decisions if this team misses the playoffs. So I think before you even get to the point of talking about making moves off this roster, I think you have to really figure out what's the direction of this franchise. Who are you bringing in to kind of stabilize and help your organization towards the next chapter? And then you kind of bring in a fresh set of eyes to evaluate the organization top to bottom. I don't think this is the time to be going out there and making some kind of panic trade, moving in core piece for cents on the dollar. And yet we've heard rumblings and reporters out there speculating that could they be looking at a wake-up call type trade to try and light up the room to spark something. But for me, I just don't think that that's the answer right now.
All right, let's push away from the tough outlook of how it's going right now. But you mentioned JT Miller. He's had another solid season here to start so far. Top 10 in league in scoring, 7 goals, 12 assists, 19 points, easily on pace for one of his best seasons of his career. He's been playing well as a Canuck. Jeff, what's the biggest change to his game? Why is he playing better, especially with the rest of the roster kind of struggling?
Yeah, and sometimes you got to be careful about getting fooled by the numbers. I mean, you can't argue the points and the goals and the assists are there, but by JT Miller's own admission after the Canucks got shut out by Chicago, a real moment of sort of honesty and clarity. And he said, I don't think that I'm playing my best. I think I've got another gear to give here. And having watched him play every game that he's played as a member of the Vancouver Canucks, he's been good in spurts for periods this season, but I don't think he has taken over a game start to finish. And I'm not sure that I've left the rink at any point this season and said, hands down, JT Miller was the best player on the ice. Again, he's had some flashes and he's had periods. I think of one when they were down 2-0 to the Rangers, his former team, down 2-0 after 2 periods, and the crowd was starting to turn on the Canucks a little bit. And he had a big third period. The Canucks tied the game, and then he scored the winner in overtime, so a 2-goal night. There have been some moments like that along the way, but he was such a complete player in that first year, 2 seasons ago, his first season as a member of the Vancouver Canucks. And he was one of those guys, his engine's just always running. And, you could count on him. Didn't take many shifts off, didn't have many nights off. And then last year was such a bizarre set of circumstances under the cover of COVID and the fact that there were no fans in the stands. And, this is a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve. And you could hear every time that he was frustrated, the outbursts were audible because there's nobody in the building. The losses mounted. And I think he took a lot of it personally. I don't think he was thrilled with the way the organization handled the whole COVID crisis. You'll recall that he was sort of asked to be the face of the players in the wake of, remember they tried to get the Canucks after the COVID outbreak to play back-to-back games to start after they'd been off for 3 weeks, and the players sort of rose up, and JT Miller was an impassioned spokesperson basically for the players that day. So he's bounced back. And again, he's a talented player. The points are there. But I tend to agree with him that I do think that there is still room for improvement in his game. And as Harman mentioned, with this year and then 1 year left on his contract, there's already a lot of talk about, would he want to re-sign here in Vancouver if they're not getting this thing moving in the right direction? Does he want to go back to the States? He's an American. There are a lot of unanswered questions about his future in Vancouver. And I certainly think that, the Canucks aren't going to let him walk for free, that he looks like he'll be a trade chip at some point, whether it's this season or closer to the trade deadline in that year leading up to his unrestricted free agency. But, for the most part, you can bank on him showing up, competing and playing hard. But just because he leads this team in scoring, I don't know that necessarily means that we have seen the best of JT Miller the way that I think we did 2 years ago in his first season when he just found instant chemistry with Elias Pettersson, and Brock Besser was on that line as well. And that truly was one of the best play driving lines in the National Hockey League 2 seasons ago. And that's one of the big problems out here this year. Those 3 guys, they've played a lot together and they just can't figure it out and find that chemistry that made them so effective 2 years ago.
All right, Jeff, I tried to throw a lifeline with a player that looks like he's playing well, but I guess he isn't to the best of his level. Last question, Harman. The number 1 prospect not playing on the big team, he is this season, and that's Vasily Podkolzin. 10th overall pick. He only has 3 goals and 4 points in 17 games, but how is his game actually progressing?
I think it's progressing really well, and a lot better than the point totals would sort of indicate. I see a player who in preseason had really struggled to kind of find his stride a little bit. You could tell that he was learning on the fly in terms of understanding what his role is in an NHL environment, the smaller rink size, the new language, new systems, new teammates. all of those factors. And you could tell he was overthinking a little bit and not quite unsure. He was hesitating in certain situations. And each game, it just feels like he's started to grow in confidence. He started the season and he was only playing, 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes a night. And those minutes have started to rise. He's becoming more and more confident with each game. And you could just tell with how much more effective he is on the forecheck, how he's starting to drive possession. I've seen a marked improvement in the comfort level with how he's playing pucks in the defensive zone and leading breakouts, where that was a part of his game early in the year where he turned a lot of pucks over in transition. And you're seeing him start to kind of piece the puzzle together of, okay, this is what it's like to be a winger in the NHL. This is what my job and my role is. And this is how I can be effective. He's starting to move his feet a lot more. I think he's playing with a lot more pace, a lot more physicality. He's not getting knocked over as much as he was in preseason. And overall, you're seeing him just grow and grow. And Travis Green has talked about it. It's part of the reason why he's earned a longer leash. And when you do look at a lot of the underlying numbers, play driving wise, he's been one of the Canucks' better forwards in helping his line control possession, create scoring chances. And so you're obviously going to need to wait a little bit, I think, for the offense to fully come. And I think Vancouver's used to having prospects like Pettersson or Besser or Hughes or even Höglander hit the ground and immediately become electric impact core pieces. I've always felt with Podkolzin that it would be a slower burn for him becoming, say, a top 6 player in the NHL. We're starting to see the progression. That's the biggest thing that I look for. He's not going to be the type of player that scores 40, 50 points in his rookie season. I think that much is obvious, but I don't think that should take anything away from the improvement that we've seen in him becoming a more complete player each and every night that I watch him.
All right. Well, the Canucks, they're in thick early on this season. I still think they have a bright future in there somewhere, especially with Podkolzin between the pipes and everything. Again, you can find them on Twitter at Paterson Jeff for Jeff, and for Harman at Harman Dayal 2. Lads, thank you for joining me.